John Mongrel was one of the most feared and powerful figures in the South African prison system. As the leader of the notorious 28 gang in Pollsmoor prison, he was a symbol of terror, control, and violence. His reign was based on fear, and for a time Mongrel ruled with absolute authority. However, his empire began to crumble due to both internal betrayals and mounting external pressures. The story of Mongrel's rise and fall is not only an individual tragedy, but also a vivid illustration of the complexity and fragility of the gang culture that dominates South African prisons. Born in 1967 in Cape Town, South Africa, John Mongrel came of age during the apartheid era, a time marked by severe social and economic inequalities. The apartheid system had created a racially divided society where poverty, unemployment, and a lack of opportunities for the black and colored population were rampant. Growing up in this harsh environment, Mongrel had little choice but to turn to crime in order to survive. At the age of 14, after committing several crimes, Mongrel was arrested and sent to Pollsmoor prison, one of South Africa's most notorious and dangerous facilities. Pollsmoor was not only home to the country's most hardened criminals, but it also became a breeding ground for gang activity. Inside the prison, violent gangs ruled the roost, and lawlessness prevailed. For a young boy like Mongrel, it was a matter of survival to quickly align himself with one of these gangs. Mongrel found his place in the 28 gang, one of the most feared and influential gangs within South Africa's prison system. The gang, named after the number 28, wielded immense power both within the walls of Pollsmoor and beyond them. To rise within the gang, a member had to prove their loyalty, strength, and ruthlessness. Mongrel was no exception. At just 15 years old, he quickly rose through the ranks, using violence and fear to earn the respect of his fellow gang members. The 28s were a gang that thrived on dominance and intimidation, and Mongrel quickly proved that he was more than capable of handling the brutal methods required to climb the ranks. His journey to power began with an initiation rite that involved killing a fellow inmate, a brutal act that cemented his place in the gang. This violent act marked the beginning of a dark and bloody chapter in Mongrel's life. Once he had proven himself, Mongrel's influence within the 28 gang grew exponentially. The 28s operated under a strict code of conduct, one that revolved around loyalty and obedience to the gang's leadership. As Mongrel moved up the hierarchy, he began to realize that his power was not just limited to the prison's walls. He developed connections with influential figures in the criminal world, both within South Africa and internationally. His power was further solidified by the control he exercised over Pollsmoor's daily operations. The gang's members feared Mongrel, and this fear was a key component of his reign. His leadership was ruthless, and he ensured that disobedience was met with severe consequences, often resulting in death. A violation of the gang's code was not tolerated, and the punishment was swift and unforgiving. Mongrel's reign over the 28s was characterized by violence, terror, and absolute control. Under Mongrel's leadership, the 28 gang became the dominant force within Pollsmoor. The prison, which had once been a hotbed of criminal activity, became a near-feudal society under Mongrel's rule. He controlled everything, from the distribution of drugs and contraband to the actions of the other gangs. Mongrel's power extended beyond the prison gates, as he maintained a complex network of criminal activity throughout the country. His connections with other gang leaders and criminal enterprises ensured that he remained untouchable, both inside and outside the prison. However, Mongrel's empire was built on a fragile foundation. Despite his power, his position was constantly threatened by both external forces and internal strife. The 28 gang was not without its rivals. Mongrel faced challenges from other gangs, especially the 26 and 27s, who vied for control over Pollsmoor. These gangs often clashed, leading to a brutal cycle of violence and retaliation. Mongrel's grip on power began to weaken as he faced increasing opposition from both rival gangs and members within his own ranks. His iron-fisted rule was beginning to show cracks. In 2006, Mongrel appeared in the documentary series Ross Kemp on Gangs, which focused on the world's most dangerous gangs and their inner workings. This appearance, while helping to further solidify Mongrel's reputation as a ruthless gang leader, also exposed him to new threats. The documentary provided a glimpse into the world of the 28 Gang and Mongrel's leadership style, showcasing the brutal and violent tactics he used to maintain control. However, his newfound visibility also made him a target. Rival gangs saw Mongrel's exposure in the media as a threat to their operations. They believed that his increased visibility would undermine the secrecy and power of the 28s. In addition, prison authorities began to take a closer look at Mongrel, monitoring his movements and communications more closely. The once invincible gang leader was now under constant scrutiny. As Mongrel grew older, his control over the gang began to erode. The young and ambitious members of the 28 Gang began to question his leadership, and internal dissent grew. The gang's structure was designed to favor younger, more dynamic leaders, and as Mongrel aged, he found it increasingly difficult to maintain his grip on power. His once loyal followers began to challenge his authority, and factions began to form within the gang. Younger members sought to replace Mongrel, leading to power struggles that further weakened the gang's unity. This internal turmoil, combined with the increasing pressure from rival gangs and prison officials, marked the beginning of the end for Mongrel's reign. In response to the growing violence and chaos in South Africa's prisons, the government began to implement significant reforms aimed at reducing the influence of gang leaders. The authorities began to isolate gang leaders in separate prison units to limit their ability to communicate with other inmates. Mongrel, once the undisputed leader of the 28s, found himself increasingly isolated from his followers. His ability to control the gang diminished, and his once absolute power began to fade. The reforms, coupled with the growing discontent within the gang, led to the fragmentation of the 28s. Mongrel's reign, which had once been built on fear and violence, was crumbling under the weight of internal conflict and external pressure. In 2014, John Mongrel died in Pollsmoor prison. The exact cause of his death remains a subject of speculation. While some reports claim that he died of natural causes, others suggest that he was murdered, either by members of his own gang or by rival gang members. Mongrel's death marked the end of an era for the 28 Gang. It also signaled the beginning of the gang's decline. With his passing, the gang lost its central figure, and the power structure that had been in place for years began to unravel. The gang's dominance in Pollsmoor prison and beyond was shattered, and the 28s slowly began to lose their influence. Mongrel's story is not just the tale of a man who rose to power through violence and fear, only to be undone by the very forces he had once controlled. It is a cautionary tale about the fragility of power and the transient nature of empires built on fear and violence. Mongrel's rise to power and his eventual fall serve as a reminder that systems built on oppression and brutality are ultimately unsustainable. Whether in the confines of a prison or the broader world, power based on fear will eventually crumble in the face of rebellion, betrayal, and systemic change. The fall of John Mongrel and the decline of the 28 Gang highlight the vulnerability of criminal empires and the complexity of South Africa's prison system. Mongrel's empire, built on a foundation of violence, was fragile from the beginning. His downfall serves as a stark reminder that even the most powerful leaders, no matter how feared and respected they may be, are not immune to the forces of time, rebellion, and change. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay tuned for more.